Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. I sat at my desk, the dim glow of the computer screen the only light in the room. Outside, the world was silent, still. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a constant reminder of the minutes I had wasted, staring at this blank email. My hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling, unsure if I could go through with it. But then the images flashed in my mind again, her and him, together, their faces inches apart, lips locked, bodies intertwined. I had seen everything. I had all the proof. I exhaled sharply, fingers tightening into fists before I loosened them, forcing myself to begin typing. To all, I'm writing this not out of malice, but to reveal the truth that has been hidden for far too long. You all know Sarah as my wife, as the woman I loved. But behind closed doors, there has been betrayal. I've discovered that Sarah has been having an affair with Michael, yes, the same Michael who sat at our dinner table, who smiled in my face while sneaking behind my back. My hands moved faster now, the anger boiling up, words flowing freely as I relived the pain with each keystroke. It's been going on for months. I have evidence, which I've attached here, photos of them together. You deserve to know the truth about why my marriage is ending. I'm filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, but the real reason is in these pictures. I've tried to stay calm, to keep this private, but I can't let them get away with this. I apologize if this is difficult to read, but I refuse to let their lies continue. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the attachment button. Was this too much? Too far? Could I ever come back from this once it was done? I heard a creak behind me. I turned to see Sarah standing in the doorway of my office, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "John," she whispered. Her voice was thin, shaky. "Please, let's talk about this. Don't do this." I stared at her for a long moment. My heart ached, my stomach churned. This was the woman I had once loved, the woman who had stood beside me for years. How had we gotten here? How had she thrown it all away? "Talk," I said, my voice thick with bitterness. "Now you want to talk? After everything?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. "It's not what you think, don't." I cut her off, slamming my fist against the desk. "Don't insult me with that. I've seen the pictures, Sarah. I've seen everything. How long has this been going on? Weeks? Months?" She swallowed hard, stepping into the room as if to plead her case. "John, it wasn't supposed to happen. It got out of hand, out of hand. You've been sleeping with him," I spat, barely able to control the tremor in my voice. "And now you want to tell me it wasn't supposed to happen? Jesus, Sarah, we were happy. Or was that a lie too?" Tears slipped down her cheeks, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. She had made her choice. "You don't understand," she whispered. I shook my head, my jaw clenched tight. "No, you don't understand. I'm done. With you, with him, with this entire mess. I'm done." I turned back to the computer, my fingers shaking as I clicked on the attachment. The photos uploaded immediately, 5 in total. Each one more damning than the last. Each one a reminder of how little she had cared for the life we had built. "John, please," Sarah's voice cracked. "We can fix this. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes." "You already made your decision," I said coldly, glancing back at her one last time. "This is mine." With that, I clicked send. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the faint sound of my email sending. It was done. Irreversible. Sarah stood frozen in place, her mouth slightly open as though she couldn't process what had just happened. Slowly, her face twisted into a look of pure devastation. "How could you?" she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could I?" I laughed bitterly, standing up from the desk, staring her down. "How could you, Sarah? How could you throw everything away, for him? She didn't answer, just sobbed quietly, clutching the edge of the desk for support. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control again, like I had wrested back the power she and Michael had stolen from me. It was a hollow victory, but it was all I had left. I'm leaving, I said firmly, grabbing my coat from the chair. I'll be gone in the morning. Don't bother calling me. Sarah's sobs grew louder, but I ignored them. I had no more pity left, no more energy to spare for her remorse. I was drained, and all I wanted was to get away from the mess she had created. As I walked toward the door, she reached out, grasping my arm, her nails digging into my skin. John, please. I pulled away from her, looking back one last time. It's over. And with that, I left. The email had been sent. The truth was out. All that was left now was to watch it burn. The fallout came fast. The morning after I sent the email, I sat at my kitchen table, my coffee growing cold as my phone buzzed incessantly with texts, emails, and missed calls. The damage had been done. By now, everyone had seen it, my family, Sarah's, our friends, and most importantly, Michael's colleagues. I couldn't bring myself to care. This was what they deserved. That afternoon, I got a call from an old friend who worked in the same firm as Michael. I answered it, half expecting some sort of lecture about how I'd gone too far. But instead, he just let out a low whistle. John, he said, you won't believe the storm you just kicked up. Michael's been suspended. I leaned back in my chair, a grim satisfaction creeping through me. Suspended? I repeated, more as a confirmation than a question. Yeah, my friend continued, his tone almost impressed. The partners saw the email this morning. Apparently, they got calls from a couple of clients who were furious about it. They don't want to be associated with any kind of scandal like this, especially with him being one of the faces of the firm. They had no choice but to put him on leave. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. Good, I muttered. It was only the beginning. Later that evening, I sat in the corner booth of a local bar, nursing a drink when my phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't a call from a friend. It was Emily. I hesitated before answering, knowing this conversation would be brutal. But I owed it to her. After all, she had been dragged into this mess just as much as I had. John, she said as soon as I answered. Her voice was thick, as if she had been crying for hours. Why? I took a deep breath. Emily, I'm sorry you had to find out like that, but, why didn't you tell me first? She interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. You could have called me, warned me. But instead, I had to find out along with everyone else, my family, our friends, even his bosses. I could hear the heartbreak in her voice, the sheer devastation, and for a moment, I felt guilty. I hadn't thought about how my actions would impact her. She was an innocent bystander in this, just like me. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I didn't think. You didn't think, she repeated bitterly. No, you didn't think. Because if you had, you would have known that this would ruin everything. I sighed, running a hand over my face. Emily, I understand if you hate me for how I did it, but you deserve to know the truth. Michael, he's been lying to you. You had to find out, one way or another. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then, a soft, shaky breath. I kicked him out, John, she whispered. I packed his things and told him to leave. I closed my eyes, hearing the finality in her voice. Emily, no, she cut me off. There's nothing more to say. He betrayed me, just like he betrayed you. We're done. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I could hear her breathing, could feel the weight of her pain even through the phone. I have to go, she said suddenly, her voice cracking. I needed you to know that you weren't the only one whose life he ruined. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Take care of yourself, Emily. She hung up without another word. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos for Michael. It didn't take long for word to spread throughout his firm. and soon enough, it wasn't just clients pulling out. His co-workers were distancing themselves from him, the whispers following him wherever he went. The firm had no choice but to suspend him indefinitely, pending further review. His career, once flourishing, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. But the worst was yet to come. A few days after Emily kicked him out, Michael showed up at her door. I heard about it later from another friend, but I could picture the scene perfectly. Michael, disheveled, desperate, standing on the front steps of the house they had once shared. Emily, resolute, refusing to let him back in. "Emily, please," Michael pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper as he stood outside the door, his suitcase by his side. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes wrinkled and dirty. "Let's talk about this. We can fix it." Emily stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. "There's nothing to fix, Michael. You broke it." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling over. "I made a mistake, okay? It was stupid, it was wrong, but we've been married for 10 years. You can't just throw that away." Emily's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm throwing it away. You're the one who destroyed our marriage, Michael. You're the one who cheated." He flinched at her words but didn't back down. "It didn't mean anything. I wasn't thinking." "Stop lying," she interrupted, her voice shaking with rage. "Stop pretending this was some meaningless mistake. You made a choice. Every time you were with her, you made a choice." Michael's face crumpled, desperation seeping into his voice. "I love you, Emily. I still love you." She stared at him for a long moment, the tension between them thick and suffocating. Then, she spoke, her voice cold and final. "I don't care anymore, Michael. Love isn't enough. Not after this." He opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off again. "You need to leave. I've already spoken to a lawyer. We're done." Michael's shoulders slumped, defeat washing over him. He looked down at the ground, his voice barely audible. "What am I supposed to do now?" Emily stepped back, her hand on the doorknob. "That's not my problem anymore." And with that, she shut the door in his face. In the days that followed, Michael's life continued to spiral. His reputation, once solid and untouchable, was now in ruins. No one wanted to be associated with him, not professionally and certainly not personally. He had lost his job, his marriage, and his standing in the community, all in the span of a few days. I couldn't say I felt sorry for him. He had made his choices, just like Sarah. They both had. And now, they were paying the price. The email I sent changed everything, there was no undoing it. The air in the house was suffocating, heavy with tension and regret. After the initial storm, Sarah and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was through our lawyers. Our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become cold, an empty shell of what it once was. The day after the email went out, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy and red from crying. I entered the room without a word, grabbing a mug from the cupboard and pouring myself a cup of coffee. The silence between us was thick, like a wall that neither of us dared to break. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet and brittle. "Why did you have to do it like that, John?" I turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "What other choice did I have, Sarah? You lied to me for months. What did you expect me to do? Just sit back and pretend like nothing happened?" She shook her head, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "I never wanted it to come to this. I never wanted to hurt you." "Too late for that," I said, my voice flat. "You made your choice." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and she looked away, as if she couldn't bear to meet my gaze. "It wasn't supposed to happen, John. Michael and it just got out of control." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Out of control? You slept with him, Sarah. Repeatedly. That's not something that just happens. You didn't trip and fall into his bed. You made a choice. Every time. She winced at my words, but I couldn't stop. The anger that had been simmering for weeks now boiled over. You lied to me. Every day, you looked me in the eye and lied. Do you know what that feels like? To have the person you trust the most in the world betray you like that? Sarah wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. I never stopped loving you, John. I swear. I was confused, and things just spiraled. I slammed my coffee mug down on the counter, the ceramic cracking under the force. Don't you dare tell me you loved me while you were screwing someone else. The room went silent again, the only sound the drip of coffee from the cracked mug onto the counter. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. After a long moment, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I made a mistake. I know that. But we've been together for so long, John. Please, don't throw everything away. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, try to work through it. I shook my head, the anger slowly giving way to exhaustion. There's no fixing this, Sarah. It's broken. We're broken. She looked at me, her face a mix of desperation and sadness. I don't want to lose you, I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. You already did. The divorce process was ugly, stretched out over nearly a year. Every time we went to mediation or had a meeting with the lawyers, it felt like I was picking at an old wound that refused to heal. Sarah tried to be civil at first, but as the months wore on, the tension between us grew. She became more guarded, defensive. She started fighting for everything, money, assets, custody of the kids, anything she could hold on to. Our mutual friends, once a close-knit group, started choosing sides. Some sympathized with Sarah, saying that I had overreacted by sending that email, airing our dirty laundry for everyone to see. Others took my side, saying she deserved it for what she had done. Either way, the damage was done, and our social circle splintered. One day, during a particularly tense mediation session, Sarah and I sat across from each other at a long conference table, our lawyers on either side of us. The mediator, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, was going over the details of the financial settlement, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was elsewhere, drifting between memories of the life we had built together and the wreckage that lay before us now. Suddenly, Sarah leaned forward, interrupting the mediator. I want the house, she said, her voice steady but cold. I looked at her, surprised. You want the house? Why? You can't afford it. I'll find a way, she replied, not meeting my eyes. The kids need stability. It's their home. They shouldn't have to leave just because, she trailed off, but we all knew what she meant, because of what she had done. I clenched my jaw, anger flaring up again. You want to stay in the house? The house where you snuck around behind my back with Michael? You want to pretend like nothing happened? Sarah's face flushed with anger, and for the first time in months, she snapped. I'm not pretending anything, John. I know I messed up, but this isn't just about you. The kids deserve a home, a place where they feel safe. I can't uproot them because you're too bitter to let it go. I leaned forward, my voice low and harsh. Don't talk to me about what the kids deserve. You should have thought about that before you destroyed our family. Her eyes flashed with hurt, but she didn't back down. I made a mistake. I've admitted that. But I'm not going to let you punish me for the rest of my life. You don't get to take everything away from me. I stared at her, wondering how we had gotten to this point. How had the woman I once loved turned into this stranger sitting across from me, fighting for scraps of what was left of our life? The divorce dragged on, but eventually, the papers were signed. We divided our assets, split custody of the kids, and went our separate ways. I moved into a small apartment across town, while Sarah stayed in the house. She kept it, just like she had wanted. I didn't care anymore. It was just a building, a hollow reminder of what had once been. Sarah tried to move on, though I could tell the weight of the affair still hung over her. She went to therapy, leaned on friends, and eventually started dating again. I heard through mutual friends that she was seeing someone, a man who treated her well, they said. He wasn't like Michael. He was stable, kind. But I didn't care. Sarah was free to live her life however she wanted. We had become two different people, moving in opposite directions. One day, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into her at the grocery store. We hadn't seen each other in weeks, and when our eyes met across the aisle, I froze. "John," she said, her voice soft but guarded. "Sarah," I replied, nodding slightly. There was an awkward silence, the kind that hangs between people who once knew everything about each other but now knew nothing. She looked thinner, tired. I wondered if she noticed the same about me. "How have you been?" she asked, her voice tentative. I shrugged. "Good. Busy with work, mostly," she nodded, twisting her hands together. "The kids miss you." "I miss them too." "I'll see them this weekend," I said, the words feeling stilted and distant, like we were strangers making small talk. Sarah bit her lip, looking down at the floor. "I'm sorry, John. For everything. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it." I looked at her for a long moment, my emotions swirling. I wanted to feel angry, to hold on to the resentment that had kept me going for so long. But instead, all I felt was exhaustion. We had both suffered enough. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I know." She gave me a small, sad smile, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had once loved. But it was fleeting, a ghost of the past. We parted ways without another word, pushing our carts down separate aisles, moving further apart with each step. And just like that, we were strangers again. Years had passed since the chaos of the divorce, and I'd moved away from the town where Sarah and I had built our life together. I needed a fresh start, a place where the weight of the past wouldn't hang over me every time I walked down the street or passed a familiar face. So I packed up and left for a quiet city on the coast, far from the memories that once suffocated me. The first year alone had been difficult. At times, the loneliness was unbearable, especially after losing not just my marriage but many of the friends who had chosen sides. There were moments when I questioned if I'd made the right decisions, but eventually, life started to fall into place again. I rented a small house near the beach and focused on rebuilding. My work consumed most of my time at first, but slowly, I allowed myself to step out into the world again. I met new people, joined a local book club, and even picked up surfing, something I never thought I'd do in my 40s. It wasn't long before I began to feel like myself again, though it was a version of me I barely recognized. And then I met Kate. She wasn't anything like Sarah. Where Sarah had been polished and put together, Kate was free-spirited, with wild, curly hair and a laugh that filled up a room. We met by chance at a coffee shop on the pier. I was reading, trying to enjoy the peace of a quiet Sunday morning when she spilled her latte all over my book. "Oh my God," she gasped, rushing to grab napkins. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see it, I wasn't paying attention." I looked up, startled by her flustered expression, and couldn't help but chuckle. "It's okay," I said, taking the napkins from her. "I didn't like the book that much anyway." She laughed, though I could see the embarrassment on her face. "Still, let me get you a new one. I'm sure there's a bookstore nearby." "No need," I replied, dabbing at the soaked pages. "It's fine." "Really?" But she insisted, and before I knew it, we were walking together down the boardwalk, talking about books, life, and how neither of us planned on spending our Sunday morning cleaning up spilled coffee. Something about her was refreshing. She didn't pry, didn't ask the usual small-talk questions that led to awkward explanations of my past. She was just easy to be around. Over the next few months, Kate and I grew closer. Our relationship didn't feel rushed or forced, it was natural, effortless. We started spending more time together, dinners, beach walks, weekend getaways. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. She brought a lightness to my life that had been missing for so long, and I found myself smiling more than I had in years. One evening, as we sat on the porch of my house watching the sunset, Kate turned to me, her face soft in the fading light. "You never talk much about your past, John," she said gently. "I don't mean to pry, but I want to know more about you. About where you came from." I hesitated, the familiar pang of discomfort rising in my chest. But with Kate, it felt different. She wasn't pushing, she was just curious, genuinely interested in knowing me. "There's not much to tell," I began, taking a deep breath. "I was married. It didn't end well." She nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "I gathered that. But there's more, isn't there?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Yeah. I found out my wife was having an affair. It all blew up in a pretty dramatic way, and we divorced. I moved here to get away from all of it." Kate didn't say anything for a moment. She just reached out, taking my hand in hers. Her touch was warm, reassuring. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said softly. "That must have been really hard." It was, I admitted, surprised at how easily the words came. "But it's over now. I've moved on." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "I'm glad you did." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace, as if the weight I'd been carrying for so many years had finally lifted. A few years passed, and Kate and I got married in a small ceremony on the beach. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a few close friends and family. I had reconnected with my kids, who now lived with Sarah back in the old town, and they flew in to attend. It felt surreal, standing there in the sand with Kate beside me, the ocean breeze tugging at her dress. I couldn't help but think about how far I had come since those dark days of the divorce. Life with Kate was everything I never knew I needed. She was my partner in every sense of the word, someone who supported me, challenged me, and loved me without reservation. Together, we built a new life, a life free from the shadows of the past. One afternoon, years after our wedding, Kate and I were walking through a park with our son, Luke, who was just learning to walk. His chubby little hands gripped Kate's fingers as he stumbled forward, his wide eyes taking in everything around him. I watched them, my heart full, when I suddenly felt a familiar presence nearby. Turning my head, I saw her, Sarah, standing a few feet away, watching us. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. She looked different, older, maybe a little sadder, but there was a calmness about her that I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, our eyes met, and it felt like the world paused. The years between us seemed to melt away, and I could almost see the version of us that once existed, standing there in the park together. But that was a lifetime ago. We weren't those people anymore. I didn't approach her, and she didn't make a move to come over either. Instead, she gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say that everything had turned out as it should. And then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a moment, watching her leave, before Kate's voice pulled me back to the present. "John," she said, smiling at me. "Are you coming?" I glanced down at Luke, who was tugging on my hand, his tiny face beaming up at me. I smiled back at Kate, my heart full of gratitude for the life I now had. "Yeah," I said, taking her hand. "I'm coming." And with that, I let go of the past for good. The chapter of my life with Sarah was over, but I had found my new beginning, a life filled with love, hope, and the family I had always wanted.